My name is Megan. I'm on the leadership team here, and I'm really excited to tell you all what church will look like today. So, we have been in this series called Transformation, and it's been really cool to hear from some of you sitting in this room about what God has shown you through that, about your experience throughout the first week of our 21-day prayer challenge. And this morning, like Trey said, you get to hear a story of life change from two of our own from the vertical community, Brad and Emily Grohofsky. And then after that, you'll get to hear from them in person as Daniel and I sit down and go a little bit deeper into what the Lord has done in their lives. And we love to share stories here because our stories matter to God. And we don't do that to dwell in the past. I just want you to realize as we're listening to this, it's going to be emotional. We don't share stories to dwell in the past and to sit there. We share stories so that we can celebrate the life change and the transformation that has taken place that only happens through God and His power. And so that's what we are celebrating today. And I also hope that for some of you who may be sitting in the room as you're taking in their story and hearing things, if you relate to those things, I hope that their story will encourage you to take your next step and move forward and allow God to work in your life and move you there. So we're going to watch this video and then we'll hear from them. Thank y'all.
My name's Brad Grohofsky, and I'm from Kentucky, originally, born and raised.
And I'm Emily. I'm from Jackson. I grew up here. Moved away for a long time, but spent the first half of my life here. Grew up in Jackson, went to a big Baptist church there.
Yeah, and I grew up, like I say, semi-Catholic. I grew up in the church with faith in my family, but overall, I would say we hit the high points with our church attendance, holidays, and things, but didn't really grow up in the true church when I was young. So we met in Nashville. I was living in Kentucky, and she was living in Nashville at the time.
We met on the dance floor, let's be honest.
On the dance floor.
We did. We both love to dance.
Yep. And
we were in like our late 20s.
A week later, we went on a date. 6 months later, I proposed to her in Nashville at Radnor Lake. Then I actually moved up to Maryland to do some more PT things for 6 months while she planned the wedding in Nashville. And we got married. So it was about a year later that we got married. And we immediately from there shot off to Annapolis, Maryland, where I had been living for 6 months. And during that time, it was quite a transition to go from
the blending of lives, we call it.
The blending of lives.
Anyone who's married knows about the blending of lives. No, it was a great time, but like I feel like we pretty early on found out some like unique differences between the ways that we were raised and the ways we view marriage and the ways we just related to each other. So we just learned a lot real quick early on.
That was when some things that I had carried with me, ways that I had lived, kind of caught up to me and were called out. So I'm an alcoholic. I'm in recovery. And that
8 years.
8 years, yeah, yeah. Thank you, Jesus. So during the first part of this journey, I had hidden things well for a while. I was very functioning. Work hard, party hard was kind of how I had gotten and structured my life through school. And that didn't really work once you're living with someone else that starts to know your everything, your significant other. And there started being problems with me, drinking at wrong times, or it was just affecting our relationship and life.
Well, and I think too that, and this is like a normal step for anybody from what I understand, he was justifying how hard he was working and also thought he could control it. And so it was just, a journey of maybe you realizing that, it was a little harder to or had control of you rather than you could control it, I feel like, is what I watched you go through. I think right after we moved to Maryland, it became very apparent to me that maybe Brad did not have as much of a control over, alcohol as he thought. And we'd also moved to this, new state, and nobody lived there, and it was just really hard for really the first year. But the first 6 months were pretty brutal, and I just would get anxious getting close to Fridays because that was when it would start. And like he said, it wasn't your. People think of alcoholism as like the guy over there on the street or whatever, and when you come out of a season of college and grad school, everybody parties, right? But some people can turn it off, and then some people can't. And so I think that was really hard for me because I could see his desire to want to be like the leader of the family, and for me to respect him as the man. And then there's this really hard place that I'm in where I had to like call him out, and that caused a lot of conflict early on. And both of us come from families who communicate in totally different ways, and we had to figure that out for ourselves, how to communicate. And so it was just really hard in the beginning, I would say. And then I just got mad, and the redhead in me, I guess, I probably jumped to an ultimatum a little too quickly. And then I was like, well, what have I done? I've made a mistake. And, which is really very judgmental, a very judgmental place to fall.
We kind of I agreed to a line in the sand. If I recall, we were sitting in the car, and I basically said, give me 3 chances. Along those lines, right? Give me 3 chances, and I can prove it. I can white knuckle it. And of course, by the 3rd time, nothing changes.
There was a night where he had way too much, and I came home from work, and he was on the bathroom floor, and I thought he was like dead or unconscious or something. And I finally, because we had not really told our families what was going on, and I called his parents and I said, you need to come, like right now. I cannot do this anymore. And they did. They came the next morning, and it was interesting because I went to church that morning. I sat by myself, and I just cried and prayed. And when I came back, as I was pulling in the driveway, I just remember praying that the Lord, because I knew his parents were coming, and I prayed that the Lord would surround the house with an army of angels, and that he would allow it to be the day that, we just went forward from there, and that we could get help. And it was interesting because as hard as I know that was for him to kind of have to like look, all the shame and everything that's comes up with having to admit that you're the one that everybody's focusing on because you're the one that has the addiction that's so visible, But the minute that his parents were involved, more people knew, more community, right? And then we sought out, counseling, more community. And it's just been, every time we've added more people into the story and into the picture, there's more accountability, and there's more community, and there's more health. I can't remember if I went to Al-Anon first and then I think I went to Al-Anon first. And boy, was I so mad about that because he didn't want to go to AA yet. And I was like, ugh, like, why do I have to go to Al-Anon? Because at the time I was being super self-righteous, and I was like, this is not my problem. This is his problem. Why am I having to do all this work and all this like gut checks? And there are things that I still say to this day that I learned in Al-Anon, like, okay, what's the next right step? Like I think about those tools that I learned, all the time in parenting and in, my line of work and things like that. So I'm so grateful for that. But we both went through a time where when somebody's coming out of addiction, even if the substance is not there, you have to relearn all of your coping skills. You have to relearn the way you relate to each other. And so it was almost like starting back at square one for a while. Yeah, so we decided to move back to Mississippi when our oldest was like 7 or 8 months old. And my family was shocked, thrilled, but shocked. Because I didn't see myself. I saw myself living in Nashville forever. And so we moved back and we just kind of started to build a life here. And I think that was a huge, just kind of like breath of fresh air for us.
You know, you still are who you are wherever you go. And just because you can breathe better doesn't mean you shouldn't be working on yourself with those breaths.
I just realized I was in like a really deep postpartum depression that I didn't have with my first kiddo. And I was like kind of drowning a little bit, to be honest. And, Brad was doing PT, but was just really not feeling, he was just really having a hard time. And so it's just kind of like a dark, every day just felt very like drudgery, like you're up with babies and,
Robot.
You're scared of what's going on in the world. And like, it was just a lot of uncertainty. And so all I could think of was like, I don't know what I need, but I need to be outside. I need vitamin D. I need to move my body, and I need to eat healthy food. And that's all I could do in the moment, the next right thing, right? So I said, okay, I need a garden. Stat, like the nurse in me. And at the time I was still part-time working in the NICU as a nurse. And so I just said, Brad, can we just like till up some dirt up the hill and have a garden? And he was like, okay. So we started gardening, and I loved it. And I called it nap time gardening. And when my babies were napping, I was up in the garden, and it was just kind of like the first thing that I felt really excited about since I was younger. And my passion back then was like music and theater. And, I really hadn't found my passion in my older age, in my 30s, So I started gardening, and I just was doing it for our family, and Brad enjoyed it too. And then somewhere along the way, after about a year, I think I would just like post pictures on Instagram, and people would say like, oh my gosh, how do you have this garden? And, how do you do it with kids? And I have a black thumb, I could kill a cactus. And I kept saying, Brad, like all these people want to learn how to garden, and nobody knows how to do it and grow food. And during COVID, people were, freaking out, like, where's my food going to come from? We just didn't know. So we had a couple friends who said, you guys need to make a business out of this. And I was like, I'm not a business owner. I'm like a nurse, clock in, clock out. Like, I don't know anything about that. And so I basically agreed to help a friend build a garden. And we had a ton of fun, and she lived near me. And when it was done, her mom wanted a garden. And she said, well, my daughter won't do it for me, but can you and Brad build it for me? And I was like, this lady wants to pay us money to build her a garden. Like, okay. And so then her neighbor wanted one, and it just snowballed. And by the end of the year, that was in 2022, we had somehow on the weekends built 22 gardens. And I was loving it. Like, I was so happy, and I just like, I felt my brain coming back to life. And I saw him coming back to life. Oh, and we were just thriving. It launched us into this like rebirthing for our family, I think I would say. So I would start to observe on the days that we would call them like garden days on Thursdays, which is when he wasn't doing PT. He was just like so much more just joyful and not drained at the end of the day, and available to the kids. And I don't know, I just started noticing this change in him, like, wow, like it really is, this is just really a kind of a new side of Brad. I was like, who have I been married to? This is kind of like a different person. And I don't know, I knew that what I had experienced when I started gardening with him being outside and just moving and being healthy, and it was just kind of, I don't know, it was kind of neat to see. And so he made a comment one time like, oh, pipe dream, if I could like come on and be full-time with Cedar Hill. And initially I was like, but again, the business was growing, and I was like, Brad, I can't meet the demand anymore. And so finally, we'd been in business for about a year and a half, and I was like, babe, this is like now or never. We either leave and see what happens or not. And so we decided to bring him on full time. And in April of 2024, we went completely, just like jumped off the cliff. And it was so scary. He wasn't scared at all. He was like,
That was awesome.
I was like, okay, cool. And I think that, and I know that about myself too, that like I thought, okay, great, now it's all up to me. I don't know why I viewed it that way, because it was up to him too, but like I'm kind of very much a control freak. And so that has been like my biggest area of growth in the last year is like, wow, Brad keeps telling me like, okay, the Lord is going to provide. And I'm like, probably, but what if? And then like he just continues to bless, not just bless us, because we don't need a lot, but just bless us and be able to bless other people through our business. And so that's why we keep doing it, because we're like, wow, look what we're able to do. You know, and so many people have told us what a blessing that it is, you know, their gardens and ways that they've just experienced, you know, what we've been able to build for them. And anyway, I just feel like that was a catalyst to launching us into a new season of life where we had always, you know, our whole marriage, we were believers. We were in church. We always went to like a non-denominational church. I was on the worship team. We were very plugged in, but it was kind of like we were plugged in this way, and then we started to get plugged in this way.
I follow and read a lot of this guy's books. His name's Bob Goff. He's out of California, the whole West, wherever he is at any moment. But it just resonates with me, his life. And one thing that he said that really stuck with me is that we're meant to be rivers and not reservoirs. I start viewing life and things in my life as tools rather than security blankets. And the only thing that matters is who I am, and who I am is a loved child of God. And everything outside of that is meant to flow out. So the business has allowed us to do that in ways, and continues to. Not just the business, just the concept of we get people connected. And has anyone ever been less happy when we finished a garden than when we started?
No, but I think it's just brought an element of, you know, generosity to our family. And when you're being generous, you can't focus on yourself unless you're doing it for the wrong reason, right? If you're doing it to glorify yourself, and that's a whole nother sermon for another day. But I think for our family, it's just like Brad told me the motto one day, and I was like, that's our family's motto, is rivers, not reservoirs. And teaching our kids, like, when you get out of your own way and you quit being defensive and you quit being, you know, worried about what people think, or, you know, your view of how things should have been, or whatever it is, and you focus on others, then that's when you really start to heal and you start to find your community, and then you start to be able to bless others. And so for so long, we were focused on each other and why it wasn't working. And then we were focused on our jobs and why it wasn't working. And now I just feel like our lighthouse, and, you know, wherever we are, what we're aimed at is Jesus. And we don't do that perfectly by any means. Ask anybody who knows us. You know, no one ever arrives, and it's a constant, you know, it is a striving, but also at the end of the day, it's just letting go. And it sounds so cliche, like letting go and letting God, but it really is true, because the more you try to control it, you know, the harder it is. So,
well, and I think when you've experienced the love truly that Jesus talks about, I mean, where your treasure is, there's your heart. And I think it just hopefully starts to flow out. And I don't know, when the mission is bigger than just what's in front of you, it just gives life a whole new life.
thank y'all so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
You
Thank
guys
you,
have
family.
gotten to know Brad and Emily through their video now, and I said earlier, my name is Megan. This is Daniel Hicks. He is also on our staff team, and he's our creative director, but he is also leading out our Vertical Men's group, and I've gotten to know Emily through Vertical Kids, and then y'all have connected through Vertical Men, right?
Yeah, we've connected through Vertical Men, and like Megan said, my name is Daniel Hicks, and a lot of what I do is behind the scenes. So normally, if you've met me, I'm in the booth. But I want to thank you guys for sharing your story, and one reason is because it's hard enough to share something in a private room with a counselor, and then Brad, I've seen you now with 20-something guys back here. But it's a jump to say in front of 400 people, here I am, this is me. And so I think we all know that that's sort of a big deal. And my prayer is that God uses y'all's story today. So just thank you for the willingness. And it's been a joy to sit with Brad through watching the whole rivers to reservoirs thing. And I'm a witness to that. I've seen you pour your life out to other men. And so thank you.
Yeah, that's incredible. Are y'all ready? Are you ready?
In the hot seat.
Ready
we
as
go
we're
deeper?
ever.
Okay. All right, I'll give you an easy question to start with. You both talked about coming from families with different communication styles, and if you're married or if you've been married or in a relationship, the blending of lives that Emily mentioned. How did you learn to communicate in a way that worked for your marriage through all of that, and then going into starting a business together and to today?
Well, we are still working on that. That is an evolving, everyday task that we're working on. But what's different and what's evolved, I believe, through working together, working with groups, therapists, is a lot of what Jesus talks about and what Nate's been talking about. It's starting with ourselves.
Yeah.
It's in any situation that initial gut feeling that we get, it's not responding to that, it's taking time and understanding what that's telling us so we can see from the other's point of view.
Yeah.
And that's the approach. It's by no means, it's hard, and a lot of times we have to revisit it. But that's what I think communication, how it's evolved for us.
Yeah.
Vinny?
Yeah, and I would just say that, when you get married, you're like, this is the way that you do things. And the other
Right.
person's like, no, this is the way you do things. And you're like, but I'm right. And they're like, but I'm right. And so I think you just have to strip that away and figure out I'm a human being, you're a human being, and how does that work together? And then once you get so tired of the point where you keep running into the same issue over and over again, then you say, let's get a person outside of this and see if they have some new tactics, which has been life-changing for us in several phases of our marriage.
Yes.
So that's been helpful.
That's great.
That's really good. Brad, I want to ask you specifically. So I heard some kind of things in the story where you mentioned Brad saying things like, hey, the Lord's going to provide. And sort of, I feel like sometimes your leadership comes out in ways of reassuring Emily, like you said, I can be a control freak or whatever. And so my question is, how has your leadership in your home spiritually evolved over time, going through a season where she admitted she had a hard time respecting you, and kind of the evolution of that, how God's led you through that. So just how has your leadership in the home spiritually evolved over time?
Well, I think in the home, what flows out is just like Jesus talks about.
Yeah.
It is, the things that are on your heart are what flow out.
Yep.
And for me, at the home, what I've been trying to do with my journey is tying into, which I skipped a lot of my journey in this. We kind of had to skim it down. So I'll take it back. I originally really came to Jesus around 9/11. I started questioning what was going on. And I've been blessed through my life that God has put some very important people at important parts of my life that I call kind of my ravines, if you will, of my hike. And it's in those ravines where those people, through community, come in and they grab you, and they're the people that tell you and bring you out of that.
Yes.
Okay? And through my journey, because of those people, I have learned how to be more godly. And like you said in a meeting once, that you don't even know that you imparted this on me, but one time you said that the father sets the temperature of the home. And I had never, that was an epiphany for me. And the temperature that I want to set at home is the temperature that Jesus sets in my heart. So again, the key has been coming out of myself at home and listening to what Jesus is saying. And a lot of times for me to do that, I just tap right back into his word. So I get frustrated, I get overwhelmed. Sometimes I need to step out. But because of those people, because of those lessons, the ability to step out of myself and put my family first by following God's lead, that's been the evolution over time. Do you have anything to?
Yeah, and I would say that, like, you know, when you see somebody make a change and they make a change, maybe it's like I'm cutting out carbs, or I'm getting up at, doing my quiet time or whatever, and you can tell if that's going to stick or not, because it's like just a quick fix. But I can truly say that, whereas in the beginning of our marriage, Brad would be like, why don't you just trust me? And why don't you just respect me? But everything around me was so uncertain because I knew that he wasn't plugged into like something that was giving him truth at the time. And I can tell you there are times where even in the last few months, I'll see the ways that he'll respond to like a really tough moment with the kids or with a family member or at work or whatever. And I'm like, whoa, you would have never responded that way before. Yeah. And I'm kind of skeptical until proven otherwise. And I have watched him, not perfectly, we both fail every day, but I have watched his reactions, and he'll be like, oh, in Matthew or whatever, and I'm like, are you quoting scripture right now? What is happening? But I'm just trying to be real about it, and that's just how we are. But I have truly noticed a change in him.
Well, that flows perfectly into my next question. So you mentioned in the video you took some tools away from Al-Anon and how that has impacted how you've parented and your marriage. But going through that season of uncertainty where you almost had to be the leader yourself, and then watching Brad come into his faith and grow and become the leader, what scriptures or biblical truths were truly foundational for that season of your lives?
One thing that I find that I keep coming back to is I want to hear what Jesus is telling me in that moment. And for me, it's been just going, when times are tough, it's going to the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus was talking directly to his disciples and to his friends. Yeah. When nothing else makes sense in my life or in the world, everything makes sense when you look at what Jesus is saying. The Beatitudes, when he's talking about blessed are the poor, blessed are the weak. Well, when you hit rock bottom, you understand what that means, and you understand how powerful that grace is. So for me, it's going back to that. I mean, you're angry at somebody, and you read about loving your enemies. I mean, that's radical. That's the most radical concept ever, in my opinion. But how do you stay mad at someone when the person that you're choosing to follow tells you to not be mad at them? Yeah. And it just changes everything. So that's been it for me, as of late at least.
I think it has just given me a lot of compassion because I grew up, I was very fortunate. I was pretty sheltered and didn't really have a whole lot of like life events and things like that. And so, you grow up in Sunday school and they're like, don't look at the speck in your brother's eye for the plank in your own. Or, ye who is without sin, cast the first stone. And you hear those stories. Right. But then when you're faced with it and you, like I was in the beginning, being very judgmental and self-righteous about it. And I think it has just, those parables specifically just always stick out of my mind. And it gives you such compassion for people who are going through it, whether it's the person actually going through, in our case, the addiction, or the person kind of living through it on the other side. So those things have just made me, I don't know, it makes people more human and less, nobody wakes up and wants to be the cause of pain, right? So yeah, those parables have been huge for me.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's really good. I like hearing how you all interpreted those scriptures to make them meaningful to yourself and your moment. My question, I guess for both of you, I'm going to give it to Brad, and then if Emily, if you want to say something, but it's about accountability and community. There were some parts of the story where you talked about hiding your sin. You're like, I was pretty good at hiding it, for a while, and then I get found out, and then I feel like the opposite of hiding is really community. And like I opened with, sitting in front of the entire church is probably the biggest example of that. But will you just talk to that? What has community meant and accountability meant in your journey, both when you first got found out and then 8 years later now, as you continue to sit in that?
Yeah, that's a good question. When we filmed this video, and right now, I'm nervous, I'm anxious. This is kind of presenting ourselves to the world, but I messaged Nate after you guys allowed us to share, and thank you for letting us share. Forget how powerful and just relieving sharing is. Just sharing your story. When you don't have anything to hide, there's nothing to be accountable for, and that you're having to keep to yourself. So in terms of accountability, for me, it's been really leaning into people and handing off those things that I used to unfairly think that I needed to rely on accountability-wise. So I would keep myself accountable, feel guilty for it, not share it with anybody, and that would just build on itself. And that guilt, that shame, it's just a cycle. And that's what the gospel does, and that's what the kingdom does, is it naturally brings that community in when you start to share. And then when you get that community, they help you, and you naturally help them. And that's how you break those chains, and that's what it's been for me. And that's what the men's group, and a lot of guys in here, I think, would testify to that too.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
And early on in our marriage, I used to just long for him to have like deep community, not just people like, hey, how's your week? Great, how's your week? And I truly did not see him seek out and enjoy being in community until about the last 2 years. And it's just been so fun to see how that has brought out like a different side of him. But also when you're in community, and this goes for me too, people don't realize what they're all going through. Like, I had a nurse one night who broke down to me when I used to live in the hospital, and she was like, I don't know what to do. My husband has an alcohol problem. And I'm just sitting there listening, and she's like, oh, how's you and your husband are so happy. And I was like, do you have 20 minutes? And I was able to share that with her, and it was relatable, and then she didn't feel alone. And like,
Yes.
there's so much power in that.
Yes. That's so good.
I love that.
So you both mentioned in the video rediscovering passions, which I think is an incredible part of the healing process. When we allow the Lord to do his work in us, then he starts to light these fires that we forgot about sometimes or that we let burn out. So tell us a little bit about that. What advice would you give to somebody about rediscovering that joy and how important it is?
I can only speak from experience, but as she was kind of discussing, and we were discussing, getting back in nature and just tapping my toes in, it reminded me of who I was at my core as a child. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where Jesus talks about the childlike faith is not being childish, but it's stepping back. And I'm so thankful I had this chance to step back and really say, who am I? Like, as a kid, what are my passions? And God wants to use that. He don't want me to be someone I'm not. So for me, it was kind of asking myself and looking at myself and saying, as a kid, what did I enjoy? What did I love? And for me, it was tapping back into not only the gardening, but I went and bought a bike. I bought a mountain bike. And honestly, that first ride was about the most fun I've had in probably 10 years. I thought I was going to die, but I didn't, and that's that faith. To me, at least to me, that's what Jesus was saying was when you peel away all the distractions and you peel that onion away of the things that adulthood has put on you, who are you? Who did I create? And to figure that out, sometimes we have just got to take all the stuff out of it. And children are good at that.
Yeah. Yes, they are. That's good.
I like that. Sometimes you just got to ride a bike.
You just got to get on the bike again.
Just go.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So with that, kind of rediscovering passions, that transitioned into the business. And what was sort of Emily's passion project, right? Starts making some money, and then all of a sudden, I remember when I met you, I think you're like, yeah, so I work for my wife. And, and something like that, and which is true. So how do you see your business as a ministry? What y'all mentioned it in the story, so just kind of go back into that. So how do you feel like you use your business to impact others and also just your family?
Yeah, clearly I cry very easily, but it's because it's so meaningful to me. And I tell people a lot of times that the reason that you start gardening is oftentimes not the reason that you continue gardening. You know, everybody's like, oh, I'm going to save money on cilantro or something, which you can, by the way. But, you know, I can't tell you what it does for my soul when my client, like, sends me a picture. And I have a client right now whose husband is going through rapid onset Alzheimer's, and she's like, you know, I'm just sitting here watching my husband deteriorate, and then I go out in my garden and I'm watching things grow. And those are the kind of stories that I'm just like, I have the best job ever, because, you know, people don't realize how far we've gotten away from like who God created us to be, and to be in nature. And that's where he reveals himself a lot of times. If you've ever watched a seed, you know, a 1 millimeter seed go from that to a 3-foot wide cabbage, you're like, wow, that is amazing to witness. Yes. And so I think that has tangibly been part of the ministry, but also in another way, we've been able to employ a ministry in town who is actually all men coming out of, they're in recovery and coming out of addiction. And so Brad is able to, you know, use his judgment when to share that. But like, those guys are in the trenches, and Brad's like, here I am 8 years sober, you know, thriving and have this relationship with God, and like able to pour into him that way. So that's just been like, I don't know, just really, really awesome.
That's amazing. Do you have anything that you want to add to that? Okay.
That was a good summary.
Okay. All right, last question. We've got to wrap it up. I know people are going to get hungry, and Emily's probably tired of crying. Okay, so we know that there are people in this room and probably watching online that are sitting in a similar situation to what y'all were in 8 years ago. Addiction is addiction. It doesn't have to be alcoholism. Sin is sin, you know. So for somebody that's sitting in that, living in that same pattern, and maybe they don't know how to get out. They feel like they're in so deep, and they just have to keep on keeping on, you know, just the robotic movements and the living life in autopilot because that's all they know. What encouragement would you give them to take their first step?
This just popped in my head, but Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, has a good saying that says, I don't know, it literally just popped in my head, find the helpers.
Yeah.
Find the helpers. Seek and you'll find, but keep seeking and you'll keep finding. And find the helpers to help you understand what you're looking for. They can help peel away those layers and continue to do so. And you start to invest in them, and it changes everything. It brings a deeper level. And the ability to start to share things that you don't have to hold on to anymore, because we're not meant to. We're not meant to be self-made. We're not meant to put all these things on ourselves. We're meant to do it together. So that'd be my encouragement, or just come talk. You know, reach out. There's a lot of men and women in this church that are really starting to connect, and it's important.
Yeah.
And I would say from the other end of the spectrum that, you know, I tell my kids all the time, like, if you're pointing a finger this way, there's 3 pointing back at you. So, you know, there's It is really hard to watch someone you love go through something and they don't know how to get out of it. And I would say it is just as loving to let someone experience the negative consequences. And people have to hit rock bottom sometimes before they make a change. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so I think, taking care of yourself, if you're on the other end of it, and, going to Al-Anon, I would highly recommend it. It's so hard because you're like, what if I see somebody there? Well, guess what? You find another person who's going through what you are going through, and then you have community.
Yes.
I just don't think people are afraid anymore of, like, looking, perfect all the time. But, yeah, I would say, focusing on yourself and what you can do, but at the same time realizing that the addiction is different than the person going through the addiction, and they're still a child of God and somebody that you love, but sometimes you just have to let people experience,
Yeah.
rock bottom before
Yes.
something changes, so.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add to that it doesn't always have to be rock bottom either. And I think it can be, it's even more brave when you don't hit rock bottom and you're able to take that inventory. So I don't want it to sound like rock bottom is the only option.
Right.
But I would say it takes even more strength to be able to recognize that in the moment and take that initiative.
Yeah, and that's why we share our stories, so that other people can hear that, and maybe they don't have to hit a rock bottom because they feel that. Yes, doesn't have to be
Emily
this.
said you can
this
share it in a
size.
smaller setting, yes. The table, ladies,
Yeah.
vertical men.
Yeah. Well, and that's, as we close up today, I just wanted to say we've mentioned community several times sitting here, and that is so important. And if you are sitting in this room and you don't feel like you have that, on Monday nights, tomorrow night, there will be a group of men sitting together in our room back behind this wall, like Daniel said, at 6 p.m.
6 o'clock.
And anybody can show up.
Yeah.
You can jump in anytime.
And I love watching Brad when people share, and he's like, you're eager to help because you're like, hey, like, will you text me? Like, put it in the group me. Like, don't go through this alone. And so,
Yeah.
I love watching that. I mean, that's what community is.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, you don't have to carry this by yourself.
Right. And on Tuesday nights, women, there's a group of women sitting in a circle in that room. We've almost outgrown that room because there are so many, but I've been able to be back in that circle for the last 6 weeks or so, and it has changed my week. I look forward to it. The women that have taken that group and led it are leading it so well. And you walk in and you hear, hey, we're going to talk about this, and you think, oh my goodness, I have to open up. But it's like Emily said, you're connecting with people, and people that you never thought you would connect with. And I know this happens with the men too. You think you never have something in common with the person that's older than you or so much younger than you across the room, and you're able to connect about something big or small in your life. But that is community. You start to build that community. So consider being in that or some form of community. It doesn't have to be one of those groups. There's others. But I hope that you will find that. And I hope that you remember that you can always start fresh, that Jesus is always right there. You always get to start new with him. It's not when you clean yourself up or until you hit rock bottom or until you're perfect and ready. But Jesus is going to meet you where you're at. And that's what he did with Brad, and that's what he did with Emily. And that's what he'll do with you too. So I'm going to pray for us as we go back into a time of worship together. Can we say thank you one more time to Brad and Emily for their bravery? I'm going to pray for us and we'll worship together. God, I thank you for this transformation, for this life change that you orchestrated, that you put together, for the community that you brought to Brad and to Emily when they needed it, God. I thank you for the community that we're sitting in right now as Vertical Church, God. I pray that the people who heard this story today and are struggling, who don't know what the next step is for them, whether it's they need help or somebody that they love so much that they're walking through addiction with or sin or just hard days, hard depression, that that they will seek your face right now, and that they will hear from you, that they will find strength, that they will find your joy, that they will find your peace, and all the goodness that comes from you, Lord. That life change will take place, that transformation will take place through your power, not through anything we can do, but only through you in us. God, thank you for what you've done here. Thank you for what you will do. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.